Hi, everybody. I am just here. Don't worry. I've just actually logged on and started the stream. So I think that you can all hear me really well. Um, I'm just going to quickly wait a few seconds. I was going to broadcast with my camera on so that you can actually see me for this lesson. But for some reason, my web camera is not connecting to you guys. But I know that you can probably hear me. If you can hear me, just let me know in the chat alongside. And then what I can do is that if you can't see me, that's okay, because then I can I can swap between this screen and the next so that you can actually see me doing some revision. It's a pity if you can't see me, but if you can hear me, just let me know in the chat alongside. And then I can actually just dive into the revision lesson. And then maybe next time you'll be able to see me. I think that was the plan this time, for everyone to be able to watch me and actually engage. I'll just wait for someone to let me know if you can hear me in the chat alongside. I'm also following along on my laptop as well, so I can see if people are messaging too. And if you guys can hear me, let me know. Don't worry, Lundi. I'm glad you can hear me. Don't worry. That's all good. I am going to share my screen with you. I'm sorry that you can't see me. I'm actually looking at the camera now, but don't worry. I am going to share my screen with you so that you can see exactly what I am doing. And that normally in our future lessons, you will be able to see me in the bottom right-hand corner over there. Okay, so let's get into the lesson today. Let's not waste any more time with some technical difficulties, and let's dive into genetics. So today what I wanted to cover with everybody was Genetics 101, and I wanted to just make sure that we are all on the same page and that we are able to do the following things. All right, so let's start off with some basics. Now, in front of you here, we have a Punnett square, and this probably looks familiar to you. You've probably done it in class already. And essentially, I want to do some quick revision before we move on to some really important things. So, first of all, we must remember that there are two types of dominance. And the first type of dominance I just want to quickly recap with you is, of course, complete dominance. Oh, whoops, not complete dominance. Now, when we speak about complete dominance, we are speaking about one trait being dominant over another. And so in order to make sure that we know what that looks like, we use different letter sizes. And some of the common ones we use might be like a capital T and a small t. The capital T is for dominant and the small t is for recessive. Now, there are three possible combinations that every organism can have when it comes to complete dominance. Now, that means that they can have two capital T's, they can have a capital T and a lowercase t, and lastly, they can have two small lowercase t's. Now, each one of these represents a possible outcome, and we use the words homozygous to describe it when two letters are the same. That is an S, everyone. And we would say at the end of this homozygous that this is homozygous dominant. I'm not writing out the whole word dominant. And then when two letters are different, like you see in this example, where two are different, we would call that heterozygous. There is no dominant or recessive at the end because they are, of course, equally dominant. No, sorry, not equally dominant. There are two of them, so they're hetero and they're opposite. So we call them hetero. There's no dominant or recessive here. And then lastly, we have the two little letters, which are also called homozygous, because they're the same for homo. But this time we would end off by saying recessive, like at the end, right? Now, I don't know if you can see that. Actually, let's get rid of that because I don't think you can see just behind the little sign on there. So it's REC for recessive. Okay. So now what I want to focus in on is how do we prove something is dominant? So now we're going to look at the example alongside here. So what we have here is two pea pods. One of them is yellow and one of them is green. Now, before we do the cross, imagine it was empty and they ask you something along the lines of, well, how do you know which color is dominant? Well, this is what you would need to do. First of all, you would have to have a true breeding couple, meaning that this yellow pea pod must only be yellow. In other words, it must only carry yellow alleles. Likewise, for our green pod, it must be pure green, right? And so they would say that in the question, they would say a pure breeding cross occurred between a green pod and a yellow pod, and all the subsequent pods that were produced were green. Now, you can see that from looking at the table, all the pods that were produced were green. That gives us an indication that green is the dominant color. And we also know this if we look at our lettering. Now, remember, they don't always give you the Punnett square in the lettering like this, but if you look at the lettering, you will see that in order to be yellow, you need to have two lowercase g's, which is true when you want anything that is homozygous recessive. You want the recessive allele to show, you need to have two of those small g's. But you'll notice that the green has two capital G's. And because you are crossing a homozygous dominant with a homozygous recessive, all the offspring will produce heterozygous, as you can see here, so a big letter and a small letter. But you will notice that they are all green, so they're all showing the dominant trait. And that is because they are following the law of dominance, which says that you only need one dominant allele present in order to express that trait. And so that is complete dominance, when one color dominates another color or another trait, right? Then let's move on to the next one as a quick recap. So if this is complete dominance, the next kind of dominance I want to cover with you is incomplete dominance. Let's just see if we go on to, oh, there we go. Next slide, there we are. Okay, so incomplete dominance, and I'm actually going to change this picture a little bit for everyone. So before you start looking at it, just listen to what I want to say first. Incomplete dominance is when you have a characteristic that makes a mixture, or we would use the word an intermediate. So what does that look like alongside? Now, what I'm actually going to do is remove this lettering here like that, because I don't like the lettering they've used, and we don't use letters like that in our curriculum. So I'm going to cover them up so we don't get confused. Incomplete dominance is a mixture. And so the example they have alongside is we have a red rose and a white rose. And when you combine them together, it makes a pink rose. Now, how is that possible? And what do our alleles look like? Well, if we think about the best way to express this, we're not just going to use capital R's and little r's. This time, we are going to use two different letters. We are going to use a capital R for red and a capital W for white. Now, if you have a red rose, like the diagram, and you must have a minimum of two alleles for it, that means the red rose should be two capital R's, and the white rose should be two capital W's. Now, how to make a pink would mean that you would need to inherit one red and one white, which means that the pink flower here would be a capital R and a capital W. Now, I want to reassure everybody that this is an acceptable way to write the alleles. In other words, what I'm doing now is I'm writing RR, W, W, and RW. This is an appropriate way that you can write out your alleles in a test or an exam. And this is a nice way to make sure that you don't confuse incomplete dominance with complete, because remember, complete dominance would only be using a capital R and a small r, right? So it's nice to keep the letters different and they match the thing that you are studying, or let's say the trait that you are doing, right? So the color, for example. So we want to use these sets of letters. You can obviously use whatever letter makes sense for the trait that you're doing, right? Now, let's move on to our next type of dominance as a quick recap. And that's obviously going to be co-dominance. Once again, I don't like the letterings that are attached to this picture, so I'm going to remove them because they make our job a little bit harder for me to explain. So what is co-dominance? Well, as the name suggests, co-dominance is going to mean that they share equal space. So the important word I'm looking for here is they are equally dominant, right? They have equal domination in the phenotype. They are equally expressed in the phenotype. And so if we look alongside, if you take a red flower this time with another white flower, instead of making pink, you are going to make a flower that is both red and white. And that's really important because you'll notice that the previous one made a pink. This is different. This is where we're having red and white at the same time. Now, how do you write this really well in an exam? Well, we've already used letters that are big and small, and we've already used different letters. Like for the previous one, we used an R for red and a W for white. What I suggest everyone does, and yes, this is correct, is I would use the letter C, and then I would superscript it, meaning I would put that like capital letter at the top if I wanted to represent red. I would then use the capital letter C and superscript it with W for white. And if I wanted to show red and white, it would look something like this. And when I write out the phenotype, I would say red and white. You could also say red with white if you wanted to. And before anyone is nervous about using this and using this method where you use a superscript at the top, and so this is how you tell the difference, I just want you to all be not nervous of what I'm saying, and trust me, because this is how we mark it at the end of the year. This is where we use our memos from. So I want you to know that because I mark at the end of the year, I know what they will and won't accept, and this is definitely something that they will accept. Now, before I continue, I want to remind everybody that if you are a member, you can obviously access the cheat sheet study guide, especially if you are a Rescue Me member. You have free access to the guide. It is in your perks. You just have to go to your members section on my YouTube, and there you can find it right at the top. When you click on membership, you can see it says see perks info. You click on that and you can get access to the cheat sheet study guide. And I actually have a lovely section on this whole section on co-dominance, incomplete, etc. And you'll be able to then work your way through this as well. Now, getting back to the video, if you also want to put any questions in the chat, please do. We are going to do a few quick practice questions to apply everything that we learned today as well, so that I know that you're all able to do this. All right, so while I wait, if there's any questions, I am going to click on to our next kind of recap topic, which is going to be a sex-linked disorder. Now, some of you might not have gotten to this just yet, so I will be teaching ahead, so you'll be able to go into class and know exactly what this is. And some of you have already done this, and so this is, again, great revision. I'm also planning on telling you a few things that maybe your teacher hasn't told you, right? So let's talk about sex-linked disorders. Let's start off with the basics. So sex-linked means that it is going to affect the sex chromosomes. Now, remember, we have two sets of sex chromosomes. We have an XX and we have an XY. XX is our female chromosomes and XY is our male chromosomes. Now, some important pieces of information is that in matric, we are only going to talk about diseases or sex-linked disorders that affect the X chromosome. We are not going to discuss any Y diseases, only X's. Now, what does that mean? That means that if we ever do a disorder, you are always going to see the disorder letter appear at the top of the X. And so most of the diseases that we do are going to be recessive disorders. And so when they are a recessive disorder, they will have a small or lowercase letter attached to the X. If, however, there is a X with a capital letter next to it, then that means that is dominant. Now, it's important to read the question and make sure you establish, is this a dominant disorder or is this a recessive disorder? And so let me elaborate a little bit more on this point. I'm just going to erase some of this so that we can work on more of the page. So, if a disorder is recessive, that means that it is going to be a lowercase letter, like so. And for females, they would actually need it on both X chromosomes. So I would write here, has disorder. But this female here, who carries a capital D with a lowercase d, she does not have the disorder. Instead, what we call her is a carrier. Now, I put the word carrier in brackets, and I really want all of you to hear this and make this an NB in your notes. A carrier is a word that is not actually accepted in your matric final at all. You are allowed to use it in your genetic cross when you put it in brackets only. So just like this, you are allowed to put it there, and you put it there to help you, but it's not for marks, and it's not correct if you write it out in the phenotype, okay? So you mustn't write it in the phenotype without putting it in brackets. Remember, it's just there to help you out. And if you're still a little confused, I'll show you now what I mean as I go through another example to show you how you would use it. Now, the other option, if you were a female, is you could be X capital D, X capital T, and you also, they do not have the disorder, right? Now, that is the case if the disorder is recessive, right? That's if the disorder is recessive. And so that means if it is recessive, you need 2 copies of the recessive allele to have it. This female over here only has 1, which means she doesn't have it. And because she has a capital D, she masks the recessive. And that means she won't have the disorder. And that's following the law of dominance. When a dominant allele is in the presence of a recessive allele, the dominant allele will mask the recessive. In our final female option, she has only 2 dominant alleles, and that means that she doesn't have the disorder, she doesn't carry it, and so there will be no expression of the disorder. Now, what happens in males? So let's remove this, and let me show you what happens in males. Males, unfortunately, only have 1 X chromosome. So if that X chromosome is broken and it's carrying the disorder, the recessive allele, this male will have the disorder. He doesn't have another X chromosome to help him out. If you have a male that has a capital letter D on it, and because this, remember, is a recessive disorder, you would need the little d to be there, and it's not. And so because they've only got 1, that's a good thing. That means this male will, most importantly, not have the disorder. Okay, so he will not have it. And I'll recap why that is the case. That is because this is a recessive disorder. And because males only have one X chromosome, they don't have another one to help them out. So that means they're more likely to get these sex-linked diseases because they only have one X to help them. Whereas on my other option for my male, he has the capital letter D, which means he doesn't have the disorder. And so what I'm trying to also tell you is that you won't ever get a heterozygous male because you can't have heterozygous in males because they are XY and they're not XX, right? So that's the background to sex-linked disorders. They are disorders carried on the X chromosome. But I want to elaborate a little further, and I want to talk about red-green color blindness and hemophilia. Now, red-green color blindness and hemophilia is one of the examples that you are going to have to know for your final exam. When we talk about hemophilia, we are going to use the very specific and only letter you are allowed to use is an H. Now, on the X chromosome, it is a recessive allele, and so we're going to use a lowercase h. For red-green color blindness, it's also found on the X chromosome, but you are going to use a small r for red-green color blindness. Now, before any of you ask me and say, well, will they tell us all this information? Will we always know? For these two examples, so essentially for hemophilia and red-green color blindness, you will have to know these letters off by heart. They will expect you to know them. However, if they give you a disorder that is new, right, that you've never seen and you've never heard of, well, then you are going to have to use the letters that they provide, but they will always give you enough information. And now, how will they give you enough information? Before I explain any further, they will always give you an X, and depending the size of the letter, like let's do a different one. It's not H, it's a different one. Let's do T. If they give you this in brackets and they say this disorder, and then they give you the letter on the X, affects people and it gives them this disease, right? Calculate the chances, blah, 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 whatever the question is. And now you're sitting there thinking, well, what kind of cross is this? Well, they've given you information. One, they have told you that this is sex-linked because they have given you an X. They've also told you that this is a recessive disease and not a dominant disease. If it was a dominant disease, they would have put a capital T there on the X, which they haven't. And so they will always give you enough information to calculate exactly what you need to do. So for hemophilia, I want to just quickly run through how we would work this out. But hemophilia would be something like this. You would do a genetic cross. So you would go P1, and let's say something like they would say a hemophiliac male times a, let's call her normal, or you can also call her non-hemophiliac female. But I want you to know that she's a carrier. And do you see how I'm putting the word carrier in brackets? You are allowed to do that because remember, you're hiding it from the marker, but it's reminding you what her alleles look like. And so if this is a male, we already know he is X and Y, and we know that she is XX. But we can't leave the alleles just like that because that's not enough information. We know that he is a hemophiliac male, so we're going to put a lowercase h on his X. And she's a normal female, however, she's a carrier. Because she's normal or not affected by the disorder, she must have at least one capital H to protect her from the disease and a lowercase h because she's a carrier, meaning she carries the disorder, but she has no symptoms. Now, once again, you would do your whole genetic cross where you would, have your gametes and the gamete letters would sit inside their little circles. That's just my little top tip. I always put my gametes in the circles so we don't make a mistake of putting the gametes too close together. And you'd go through the whole cross, and I'm going to save time and not do the entire cross. And I'm going to jump straight to the Punnett square, and the answer at the end. And so what that would look like, if here is our Punnett square, is we put in our hemophiliac male and our normal female who is a carrier, and we cross multiply our options into the Punnett square. And now comes the important part, grouping everybody together. Now, first things first, you will actually see there are 4 different genotypes and also 4 different phenotypes. So the first one over here, there isn't anyone who's similar to her. So we would say that there is 25% X capital H, X lower, and that means there's 25% normal female. And we can do the same for all the others, right? So we can do the next female, she's down here, and there is 25% X little h, little h, and that means 25% hemophiliac female. Now, some of you might know that hemophiliac females actually can't be born, like they won't actually be produced or created. And remember that it's not a trick question if they ever ask you that. They just want to know what is the probability of having a zygote made with hemophilia. And so the probability is 25%, the probability, right? But if you actually read, and some of your textbooks will say this, it will say that there's no such thing as a hemophiliac female. That's true. No one is ever born, no female is ever born with hemophilia. That's because she is, miscarried. But I want you to know that it's still possible to calculate the percentage chance. Now let's do the 2 males. So we've got one male over here, and he has 25% X big H Y, and so he's 25% normal male. Oh, that's a horrible letter M. Let me write a little slower. Male. And then the last one, I'm not even going to color in because he's also the last one. He's XHY, 25% hemophiliac male. Okay, now that's how you would write out your answer. But I want to see what would happen, if we had a slightly different combination of hemophilia. And I want to show it to you because I want to show you how you would group some of the females together. Lundi, I do hope that you see why it's not 50%, but you did say you see so I'm happy that you can see why I have it the way I do. So I want to show you one other possible cross with hemophilia, and I want to show you how you group it together, because this one, a lot of matrics make a mistake, like a lot. Okay, so it's not going to be this cross. I'm going to make a new one. All right. So let's say you had a cross of a normal male times a normal female, but they tell you somewhere in the text she's heterozygous, which means if they ever say a female who's heterozygous for hemophilia, you should automatically already know that she's a carrier. And so if we fill in their letter H's, he's a normal male, which means he must carry a capital H to protect him from the hemophilia. Remember, he doesn't have another H. And because she's a normal female, she also has a capital H, but she must have a lowercase letter as well because she's carrying the disorder, right? Now, if I fast forward, I don't show you all the gametes and I don't show you all the other stuff. Let's just go straight to the Punnett square because I want to save time. And I've got one more thing I want to cover in our revision today. We put the alleles in our Punnett square, And now we work our way through the Punnett square, doing the usual cross. Okay, now I want you to notice that we have a few new combinations that we mustn't make a mistake. So first things first, if we are going to group these by their genotypes, you will notice that there are definitely 4 different genotypes here. There are 4 different ones. But there are phenotypes that are the same. And I want to show you what I mean if I swap over here. These 2 females, even though their genotypes are different, their phenotypes are the same. So how would we write that? Well, we would say that there is 25% X capital H, X capital H, and 25% X capital H, X small h. However, they together represent 50% normal, or you could write non-hemophiliac female. So it's a normal female. Now, why am I grouping them together? Because remember, this is the phenotype. These are the genotypes. And remember, you can have different genotypes, but have the same phenotype. In other words, it's kind of like those, if we do like a black and a white cow, right? So you have black cows and you have white cows. Just because the cows are black doesn't mean they're not carrying another color within them. So they could be heterozygous or they could be homozygous. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because their genotypes are different, that their phenotypes will be different. So we can put these 2 females together. And another reason why is because they're both carrying one dominant allele. And that means that it masks any recessive allele that's there. And then the remaining one is easy because the rest are going to be like as always. We've got one male here, that's 25%, and another one, and another one here that is hemophiliac male, so that the rest of this I would put here normal male, and then, that's hiding behind that. Let me move that up a bit so you can all see it. So we've got 25% normal male, and then another 25% hemophiliac male. So those ones are connected like that. So that's where that links up for everybody. Now, red-green color blindness is exactly the same. You would be able to calculate the same thing. And the only difference is you're going to talk about, as the name suggests, red-green color blindness. And so you would just use the letter R, and you would calculate it exactly the same as you calculate anything else. So I don't want you to worry too much about not watching me do the red-green colorblind, because it's exactly the same. I just want you to know that you have to know the letters off by heart. So to assist everybody as well, what I thought would be useful today would be to help you to explain and support your answers. Now, a lot of us don't really know how to support our answers. So how to, oh my goodness, look at my spelling. Let's change this here. This should be 2. And actually, let's move it a little more into the screen. There we go. So how to explain your answers. And so what that means is, or how to support your answer in an exam or a test, what you need to be able to do is a couple of things. In an exam, you're probably going to say, well, how do you support a genetic example? Like, how do you explain yourself? So there are 3 main ways, and that's what I want to get to today. The first one is you are going to use ratios. Now, you may remember that when you do a cross, a genetic cross, you might get 25% of one, and you might get another, let's say, 25% of another one, and then obviously another 25%, and then another 25%, which obviously makes the 100. And that means you have a ratio of 1 is to 1 is to 1 is to 1. So you've got like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And that kind of ratio is going to help you explain what the parents are and how you calculated it. Another way is if you get like 75% to 25%, right? So you've probably had that before when you've done a calculation. This is also what we call a 3-to-1 ratio. And what that explains is also what the parents are, like what their possible alleles were, because there's only one possible solution for this, and that is when the parents are heterozygous, because I'll prove it to you now. If I quickly do a small Punnett square alongside here, there we go, I've just proved it. Let's actually move this over here so you can also see it. There we go, on the other side. And so I just want you to see here that the 75% is 1, 2, 3. There's my 75%. And then here is my 25%. And that's what gives us this 1 is to 3 ratio. And so that's what always helps us calculate what the mom and dad is. Without knowing what they are, we could calculate it with a ratio. So if they ever ask you how to explain or to support your answer, you can use a ratio. But sometimes ratios are not going to help you. So let me show you your next option, the next thing that will help you. And it has to do with the law of segregation, and it has to do with how you can use what the parents are. So the second way you can help yourself and support yourself is explaining allele inheritance. And so this is everyone's worst nightmare in an exam. The question says, like, the offspring is, and let's say the offspring is something like this, heterozygous, okay? And then the question says, explain how this is possible. So how do you explain this possible offspring? Well, you actually have a very simple formula answer that I would love for you to learn off by heart. And all you do is you substitute in the answer, like in other words, you substitute in the trait, whether it's a blood group or maybe it is a fur color, whatever it is. And so all you're going to do is you are going to, and when I say tell me, I mean write it down. So tell me what mom is. For example, maybe mom is capital D, lowercase d. Next one. Tell me what dad is. And so for there, let's say, for example, he was 2 lowercase letter d's. And the third and final thing, because remember, we want to make this combo. Hey, remember, they told you this is the combination you want. How did we make that combination? The third and final point, you will tell me, what did I get from each parent? And what did you get from each parent? Oh, I'm so sorry. That's a little bit low down. It's a little struggle here to see. Let's see if I can just move it around a bit. Let's see if I can't just move that up a bit so you can see a bit better. There we go. And so what did I get from each parent? And then that's your moment to say, well, I got, to make this combo, I got the capital D from mom, and I got a lowercase from dad. And that's how I ended up with this combination. There's the capital D from mom, and there's the lowercase from dad. And that's how you explain yourself. And yes, everyone, that means that this question in an exam will be 1, 2, 3 marks. Sometimes 4, because what they do over here is they give you another tick to put the 2 letters together. But generally, this is a 4-mark or 3-mark question in an exam, and that's how you explain yourself. So that's explaining inheritance. And the last one I'm going to do before we wrap up our lesson today is, how do you explain, because we did it now, sex-linked disorders? Because they're going to ask you, it's their favorite question that they ask every year, and this is the third one. Oh, let's write this in black rather. They are going to ask you somewhere, why do more males get sex-linked disorders, right? And that's a very common question. And so now you have to explain that. So this is the third and final thing. And may I add, you can use this template answer for all sex-linked crosses, okay? So what that means is you are going to have to explain, why do males get a sex-linked disorder? Well, that's because, number one, what you are going to say is you are going to mention that males are XY, right? So that means they only have one X chromosome. Then you are going to elaborate on that. And elaborate means also kind of explain. And you can say something like, males are XY. You elaborate on that, which means that if the X carries the disorder, there is no other X to mask it, which means they will have the disorder. But this, at this stage, if you stop now, this only gets you 2 marks. We want 4 out of 4, and often this question is out of 4. So how do you get the other 4? Well, if the question is out of 4 and they're saying, why do more males get it than females? Now you have to talk about the females. And you'll say, well, females are XX. And now you're going to elaborate on that. And you're going to say, well, because they have 2 X chromosomes, they have 1 X can carry the dominant allele and mask the recessive. Okay, and then that gets you another 2 marks. So that gets you a 4 out of 4. Now, my last top tip when it comes to this kind of question is, if they just say, why do more males? So they don't mention any females, then you are only going to reference this first part of my answer. If, however, they are going to include females, then you need to also reference this part of my answer to get full marks. Okay. Now, I think that's where I'm going to pause and stop right now as a kind of good 2-week recap of everything that you've probably done in the last 2 weeks at school. I am going to be doing another one of these live lessons later this weekend as well. So please look out for a notification. I will post the next time. And in case you missed that one, don't worry. I always record these lessons and they go live when we're done, so you can watch them again. And then hopefully also in our new one, you'll be able to see me, and that my camera will switch on so that you can see me, and we'll be able to chat as well. And you'll be able to put your questions as well in the chat, because I can see all of your comments alongside. In the next lesson, what we'll do is we'll practice some questions together on genetics. And then I may even teach you pedigree diagrams, which is the next section of work that you'll probably do. And then eventually we'll also get around to dihybrids. So look forward to 2 more genetic live lessons that are going to come out shortly, and join them, because this is one of the most challenging sections that we do. Amanda, I see your comments. I'm assuming you're wanting more, like you want me to bring more live lessons, and I am absolutely doing that. I've completely changed up the setup for my live lessons, so it's going to be actually a lot easier for me to do more of these now with you. And so you'll see that I'll be going live a lot more regularly, and you'll be able to join them, and just look out for those links. But I think what I'll do is I'll end the live lesson today here. Look out for the notification this weekend, because I'm going to post another notification for another live lesson where we'll continue our genetics, as some of you might prepare for your May, June exams, or your rewrite. Maybe you're doing a supplementary. And I think that's it for today, unless we have another question in the chat. And I will see you all again soon. Bye.